welcome back to Frontlines and Faultlines with Mike Kelly. It's great to be able to continue our conversation with John Spencer, who has been at the forefront of challenging a lot of the misinformation that's been going on around the current armed conflicts that have been plaguing the world. But also, it's important for us, we're particularly interested too, and what are the lessons learned that we see from this? You know, are there tactics, techniques and procedures that the Australian Defence Force, for example, should be really zeroing in on and taking notice of? What relevance is it to us, but also for challenges like urban environments and others in these conflicts we're seeing in Ukraine and the Middle East more broadly. You know, Israel and the US have been engaged with Iran, and of course in Lebanon we've had the campaign against Hezbollah and this proxy universe. So, what are we learning from how to tackle this, and is there a way to achieve better minimisation of civilian casualties, or is that just an impossible dream? So, John, for you personally now, in the deep dive and analysis you've done, and you've seen all of these incredible multidimensional tactics being deployed, from exploding pages through to the drone launches in Ukraine, in Russia by Ukraine, and also in Iran by Israel. How would you sort of basically list all of the most interesting, innovative aspects that we've seen in these conflicts? You know, what they boil down to you as the most interesting?
Oh man, that's hard to do. I've been really busy from, you know, Nagorno-Karabakh to Israel to Gaza, Lebanon. I just got back from India 2 weeks ago, studying the war between India and Pakistan that recently happened. Of course, during that time, the 12-day war against Iran happened. There's a lot of lessons, a lot of shifts in the character of warfare. Is what we say. You know, the nature of warfare is enduring. It's human. It's political, and it's uncertain. The character is constantly changing, and we've seen that from Ukraine recently with like Operation Spider's Web to, like you said, what was done with Lebanon, which, having been there now, I've interviewed the prime minister 3 times, the head of the IDF, the minister of defense, the entire chain of command, and some of the things that were achieved were just unthinkable, based on not just on like the advancements in, of course, necessity is the mother of all innovations, but the deep intelligence penetration of both Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Iran. Some of the things that were done during Operation Rising Lion are yet to be studied, will be studied around the world, especially their really turning on their head what is the ideal of what we call a joint forcible entry, that opening campaign, to achieve a level of surprise. Some of the things that Israel did, it really shakes up what people think about, even to penetrate somebody's operational environment. What Israel did to, I mean, they texted the senior commanders within the IRGC, had them all at a meeting, and they thought they were talking to themselves, and it was actually Mossad coordinating their death. And the opening moments, they struck that meeting that they called themselves, killed 9 nuclear scientists in the opening wave, took out all of the air defenses, so killing 20 senior commanders, from the head of the missile command to the head of the IRGC himself, all in the opening strike. There is no comparison in war to that. That would be like taking out the entire German military command, all the field commanders, Himmler, and everybody before the first boots touched Normandy in the opening campaign. What they did even to achieve air corridors, so not, you know, flipping on its head about air superiority, air supremacy, what they did to create the air corridors, in which they did the use of old technology, new technology, you know, 10 years of intelligence work to emplace drones and short range missiles next to air radars that you don't need to take out from the sky, you took out from within the country. So many elements of that in it of itself would need to be studied. You're right, the pager and the enemy always gets a vote. So I want people to also understand that in all of these cases, the enemy also got a vote Of course, Hamas built one of the greatest military challenges that there really wasn't a solution to,
Mm-hmm.
other than to enter the enemy's terrain and take what he values most, which is his terrain and his power to govern. To do that takes a lot of work. So somebody believing that there is a cool and fancy way. One of the things that I deal with a lot is from the uninformed, from political to media is, well, if Israel can do this stuff, can do all these miraculous operations against Hezbollah, against Iran and others, why couldn't they? They're doing this in Gaza on purpose. And that's a real ignorant way to think about the challenges, objectives, environments. You know, like Hezbollah lives in a very diverse society in Lebanon where you can infiltrate its intelligence networks to the point where they're ordering pagers and walkie-talkies from Israel. They don't know they are. There so many elements of that, but there are lots of tactical lessons I've learned over the time. To point out one, what Israel did, which no military in the history of war that I can, until you go back to ancient warfare, has done, which is turn the underground into not the enemy's territory, but whoever can dominate it. So Israel, as they evolved in Gaza, was basically entering Hamas's tunnels and using Hamas's tunnels before they knew IDF were in it as a maneuver corridor and maneuvering against the enemy on the surface and underground at the same time. So a level of joint combined arms maneuver that's never been imagined.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing air, surface, subsurface, and there's at the same time to achieve that cognitive overmatch, which is that higher level of combined arms maneuver people talk about, the psychological. That in of itself, I viewed as a huge, like people just don't understand how incredible that is. But even in the world of what we call civilian harm mitigation,
Mm-hmm.
right? One of the reasons I was so vocal since October 7th is I also was fighting against good ideal theories about what should be done in war to protect civilians, all the way down to just don't fight. Just don't fight in the urban terrain. And then actually, Amnesty International put that in print during the Ukraine war and said it was illegal for the Ukrainian soldiers to be in the urban areas they were defending. That was the law of war violation. That's the level of insanity. But there has been a field of study called civilian harm mitigation that all of our militaries have studied and go,
Yes.
okay, given these scenarios, here's the things that will help to do that portion of the law that's required, which is the feasible and reasonable steps to limit civilian harm, like the choice of munition and the time of strike and all of these things that allow you to calculate what the civilian collateral damage is, or like evacuations. How do you do civilian evacuations? In the field of civilian harm mitigation, Israel has invented ways that nobody's ever tried, like handing out their maps to the civilians so the civilians have a better idea of very micro level evacuations and status. It caused the IDF to give away parts of their security because now they're talking to the civilians and saying, like today, I'll be in area 231. If you're there, please leave. It's very dangerous. If you're not there, don't come there. So they're giving away elements of their surprise. They've deployed facial recognition technologies that I wish I would have had on the battlefield. Where I was standing on the side of the road with like a bolo list of cards going, trying to pick out a face.
Right.
They don't do that anymore. Now they have facial recognition stands, drones with facial recognition where they can pick out that combatant who's trying to blend in with the civilians. There's some elements here that the IDF have created. Of course, they're being judged on the opening moments of the battle. They're not being judged on like operations to include in Lebanon. There's a very low civilian death rate happening in southern Lebanon when Israel deploys multiple divisions because the civilians were able to evacuate.
Mm-hmm.
In Gaza, though, like in Rafah, where they were told, like you said in our last podcast, where they're being criticized for moving people, then being criticized for not moving people. So in Rafah, where they said we're going to evacuate, they did, even though the world said you can. And there is single digit civilian casualties, but nobody cares about that. They only want to talk about the opening moments of the war when you had those 30 to 50,000 Hamas and other fighters defending urban terrain, trapping civilians inside. They want to talk about those 2 months, not the evolution, and then they want to aggregate all the information. But what Israel has done to create new ways to mitigate civilian harm, even when the civilian governance structure, so the enemy who is responsible, people forget about that. Like, what
Hmm.
is the responsibilities of the defender who's responsible as well to limit civilian casualties?
Hmm.
Despite when that other side is doing it, Israel found a way to still be able to distinguish, to separate, to notify the civilians in a very unique way.
Yeah, it'd be easy to eliminate all casualties by laying down your arms and releasing hostages. Be over in a heartbeat. But also, when we come back to, I mean, most of my life in the Australian Army was wrapped around the counterinsurgency sort of sphere and human intelligence issues associated with that, and all these issues around how do you operate in the sea of the people. And one of the interesting things in Israel's adjustment of its tactics has been what we called in Iraq that sees hold build strategy, and associated with that, and I ran into this in Somalia when I was there, where the relief agencies were being exploited by militias. So they'd come in and steal their relief materials, sell them across the border in Kenya and buy weapons, or they'd pose as guards during the day for those NGOs, and at night they'd come and rob and kill, etc. I remember in one situation alone in Baidoa, a Red Cross compound, 16 Red Cross workers were killed and everything they had there was stolen. And so by the end of that sort of phase of things, the ICRC was the largest armed organisation in Somalia. And I think they learned their lessons from that. I could show you pictures of an MSF vehicle with a crew-served weapon on the roof, a machine gun. And so I'm seeing all this repeating itself again, where the relief agencies in Gaza were being exploited by Hamas. Once you took away the prop of Iranian money, etc., the business model for Hamas was actually stealing relief materials in order to keep paying terrorist operators. And so Israel's strategy seemed to be to de-link that, and of course, as a state, they are the ones who have the obligation of managing relief, not NGOs. No blame will be sheeted home to them. It's the state responsibility. But also, the law says you have the right to take control of that where these materials are ending up in your enemy's hands. So it's there, spelled out in Article 23 of the Fourth Convention. They've ignored all that, and then the NGOs have been bleeding about, in interfering in, their space, and humanitarian principles are being violated, but there's a war going on there. But in relation to these tactics that Israel's trying to follow and creating this Gaza humanitarian fund and all that, and I'll come back to that point, but is this a strategy that Israel should have adopted earlier, or just was it not possible in that escalated combat environment for them to be unable to adopt the seize, hold, build strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I just had General McMaster, who was kind of at the forefront. Of course, the counterinsurgency theory goes back very far. In this population-centric strategy, once you've entered the counterinsurgency phase, well known. Highly recommend David Petraeus and Andrew
Mm-hmm.
Roberts' book Conflicts, because they rapidly break, kind of show you the evolution of even where hearts and minds came from and clear hold build. And I had General McMaster to talk about the 2005 Battle of Tal Afar, where he implemented a version of a clear hold build. It's very well known capability. Within Gaza, I've faced many people believing that that should have been the strategy in the beginning. There's a resource problem with that. Like you said, most people don't factor in places of the last. We have this problem of counterinsurgency hangover, or at least glasses that people look at all warfare through. Um, and I started this, analyzing Gaza. Like, why would you call this a counterinsurgency campaign? This is a operation to defeat an enemy military and an enemy government who has had autonomy of a region. It's not an insurgent force insurging against this other government. Whether you talk Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, you name it. This is not what the case was in the beginning. right? This was Israel had been invaded by this force from a different area, and they waged war against them. It's the wrong framework, but the people immediately applied it. Now you could say, well, but could they have applied clear, hold, and build in the beginning? Just by resource constraints, right? So the idea after October 7th was fighting a seven-front war.
Yes.
So they had to have multiple divisions in the north towards a greater threat. And it's a very small military of less than 100,000 standing, and most of that is people in training. So they had to mobilize their total population for about upward of around 300,000 forces. Even if you use counterinsurgency theory of what the number of security force you need versus the population to implement clear, hold, and build,
Yes.
Israel doesn't have that many forces. Even if it could have only focused on Gaza the entire since October 7th, and that's not the case. It had a much larger military who had planned to invade, just missed the email, in the northern Israel.
Yep.
And then you had Iran, you had Houthis.
Yes. Syria.
It was a resource constraint.
The whole deal.
Syria, the Houthis. You still had fighting going on in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. You have Hamas and other terrorist groups there planning operations against Israel. But even if they had the resource constraints, in order to clear, pretty straightforward, right? In order to clear an area, even in that phase, though, if I even go back to Tal Afar and other areas, step one, remove all the civilians out of an area, then go in and clear very methodically the enemy in that area, hold it so they can't come back and can't rebuild, and then allow people to come back. And if you go back to Battle of Fallujah, Ramadi, all these counterinsurgency battles, every single individual who re-enters the terrain is authorized to re-enter. So they're searched, they're checked if they're enemy, like all these elements. To have done that in Gaza, but inherent in the clear, hold, and build is that the enemy is a very small fraction, right? Counterinsurgency theory means that there's a very small fraction of the population that is the enemy.
Basically cells rather than formations and units. Yeah.
So that gets you to, is that the case in the Gaza population? Is it the case that those that would resist somebody holding and implementing clear, hold, and build is only this small population? Everybody else would be okay with the framework. And I question that based on my knowledge of all the different terrorist groups that are in Gaza, the radicalization that has been happening in Gaza since birth. So to apply the counterinsurgency framework on, of course, eventually, once you defeat Hamas, you have to implement a clear and hold, because if you don't replace the power, so there's that aspect. It's true, and then there's ways to do it. There's a bubble, what we call the ink blot strategy. But to say that Israel had all the resources it needed and it just wouldn't implement the strategy is also not true based on all of my research. At this point, though, like you said, Israel has defeated Hamas's military very creatively and at a cost to themselves that wouldn't have been predicted. Like although they've lost over 1,200 soldiers, the cost to them, 480, 800 soldiers. The cost would have been much greater had they not done the way they have to defeat the military formations in Hamas. Hamas doesn't have a military. There's nobody left, especially in the leadership. Every battalion and above commander of Hamas, it has been eliminated. There's like one or two guys left. That doesn't mean they don't have thousands of, like you said, the average age of a new Hamas recruit is about 16. Doesn't mean they don't have people willing to fight under the banner of Hamas.
Or that take money to do it.
That's right. Take money, or it's just the only way you survive is to be a part of, like, the food was a big part of that power in the Gaza Strip. Israel did try multiple times to go around, not around the United Nations and the NGOs who were delivering food. Most people don't understand how that's done in a combat zone. Like you said, the only reason that the United States was involved in the operations in Somalia was because of trying to get the food to the people, which led to the Battle of Mogadishu and the complete abandonment of U.S. military operations.
Secure humanitarian relief was the mission.
That's right. And Israel experienced that after a lot of disinformation about the status of aid in Gaza, they actually tried to deliver it themselves, and Hamas attacked those formations, sent convoys out to attack those formations. So they built this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a creative invention. Because of there are many aspects. Yes, clear, hold, and build has been proven. Yes, at some point, in order to do the complete objective of removing Hamas from power, we are seeing things like we saw in Iraq, where you had people who weren't with the majority, which is Hamas.
Yes.
So you have the same things that you and I saw. You have clans in Gaza who are saying, hey, I don't like what Hamas is doing. Just like in all these other battles against Al-Qaeda in Iraq or Sadr forces, Jaish al-Mahdi, you find people who are against them who don't want to destroy either you or the government that is trying to be established.
Bring ruin on their country.
That happening in Gaza, right? So people are criticizing Israel for arming clans to fight Hamas, which is historically done in almost every operation that I've studied. Now they're criticizing Israel for figuring out how to feed directly to the people. Most people don't understand how the United Nations and NGOs got food into Gaza. I've personally been to Gaza multiple times and seen fields of aid that is waiting for a United Nations sponsored truck. Although they don't themselves do it, they hire locals in contract. And who do you think those individuals are? Some of them are just people who took the job posting. Some of them are Hamas, or they drive in and then Hamas takes the aid and takes it to a warehouse that they control. But then there's somebody with a World Health food program or something at the center that's pushing it out. Most people don't understand that intricacy.
Yes.
But it is very telling that once the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was established, that the number one and number two opponents of feeding people directly, of course, was Hamas. And they sent people out to attack the sites. But the other person involved opposing it was the United Nations. Saying that this is wrong. You can't feed the people directly. In the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the numbers are off the charts, but they're feeding 1 million plus people a day, over 70 million meals in less than 6 weeks at the time that we're talking. And the United Nations is still saying it's a bad thing.
Yeah, and basically saying we don't want to take sides, which is like crazy to me. You're fighting against a terrorist organisation, but also it seems they're not joining the dots that Hamas is the organisation that has the interest in seeing GHF not succeed. And so they will create circumstances, in fact, kill people themselves. And no one's joining those dots or commenting on the fact that we don't know who caused these casualties, etc. It's just automatically jumped to Israel's killing people at humanitarian relief sites.
Right. This has been the gross moral equivalency that people try to do, saying like, we're against all of this and any killing is wrong. Like, no, there is right and wrong. There is legal, illegal. There is moral, immoral. And the feeding of people should be irrelevant to that. And what the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a U.S.-Israeli invention to completely civilianize, it's not the IDF giving out meals. That's should be celebrated around the world and is celebrated by the people lining up to get the food. But you're right. The world then spins it if there is something happening as a bad thing. And of course, not only it's a bad thing, but Israel did it.
Yeah. Well, mate, look, we covered a lot of ground there and there's so much more to cover, but I really appreciate you taking the time out with us. I know it's late your time there, but thank you so much. And we'll need to be in touch much more in the future, John. So thank you for being with us. And look, thanks everybody for chiming in with us. I hope it was interesting to you. It really should be. It's a fascinating time to unpick all these things. So we'll see you again next time on Frontlines and Faultlines. Cheers.